Welcome back, peeps, to Purrfect.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks.
Now with your amazing hosts, Alex Patterson and Brittany Postma. This episode is sponsored by Builder.io. Visually build on your tech stack. What's happening?
How's it going?
What's up?
James has asked me for the YouTube stream. I forgot to send this link out, folks. So normally I would say, what's up, Purrfect peeps? We've got James Q. Quick on the show today. He's going to talk to us all about PlanetScale. What's the title on this one? Enterprise databases that scale?
Yes.
Ooh, does this have to be an enterprise database, James?
No, it does not. My wife just had a question for me, completely out of developer context, just out of curiosity, if it was only enterprise or if PlanetScale was specifically more enterprise focused, which I mean it is in terms of all databases are, because that's where the money is, right? And that's where the scale is. But I think the coolest part is some of our developer features that we'll get to talk about throughout the stream.
I agree. James is one of our good friends that we've had on before. He probably doesn't need much of an introduction. We're from Compressed FM, Learn, Build, Teach, all the things. Do you want to give yourself a little brief introduction just to let everybody know?
Yeah. Well, first off, I saw, or I was not expecting the new intro. I don't think you had all of that before.
Yeah,
that was pretty wicked. So
we're trying to go more live. I got to stitch it together a little better, it looks like. But I got a new timer I'm going to put in. And we're going to be good.
That was cool. Yeah, I was not expecting that. So yeah, my name is James Q. Quick. I have mentioned this a couple times recently. There's a football player that went to the NFL named James Quick. So for SEO purposes, I had to embrace the middle initial. So if you just search James Quick, you'll find football for at least the first couple. And then if you first search James Q. Quick, you'll find me. Nice. But I am a staff developer advocate at PlanetScale. We'll get to talk a lot about that. And then outside of that, I've been doing some combination of developer, speaker, and teacher professionally for about 10 years now. So I do a lot of content outside. You mentioned the Compressed FM podcast, YouTube, Discord, all the things, just hanging out and being part of the developer communities.
That's awesome. So last time you were on, you were actually, I think the last time, you were part of Auth0 still. You're a developer advocate over there. Did you take any time off before jumping into PlanetScale?
It's funny. I gave a talk about career tips, which I thought went really well for a local but now global group called Code Connector, which I was really involved in pre-pandemic in person. But it was all about career advice, and one of them was to negotiate. And there's other things that you can negotiate that are not just salary. And one of them is start time. Yeah. And I had to caveat that with I have not done that well at that myself, because I wanted to take a solid month off between Auth0 and PlanetScale. And my VP was like, well, we have this big launch coming up that we would love to have you start for. So anyway, I started, I think it was a week and a half, almost 2 weeks after leaving Auth0. But then right after that, I took the entire week of Thanksgiving. And then it was I worked a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then I was off for another 2 weeks at Christmas. So I think it still kind of worked out well just because it was the holiday. So even though I didn't take formally a bunch of time in between, I got plenty of not working hours shortly after that.
Nice. I have same story starting up at Builder. It's same time frame. It's I'm going to peace out during the holidays. Sorry. Cool. So I'm kind of curious as far as transition goes, and it seems like a completely different product. Were you prepared to jump into the database world?
Yeah, well, so to be honest, that was one of the reasons I'm multitasking and retweeting, by the way, to say we're live so other people can see us. But
well, thank you.
You're welcome. That was one of the reasons that I did it. And it's the exact same situation that I was in with Auth0. Going into Auth0, I had been at FedEx, and I just knew I wanted to do content in DevRel again. So that I was looking for DevRel roles. I didn't know anything, literally nothing about authentication, knew nothing about OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect and JWTs. I had seen talks on JSON Web Tokens and was mind blown. I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me how this would work and how that's secure and blah, blah, blah. So it's just a big learning opportunity, I think. Yep. And that's at this stage in my career, I know a lot, about a lot of things. I don't actually have like professional software experience for more than 3 years outside of FedEx, where I would like just writing code every day. Otherwise, it's been teaching and still building stuff and learning stuff, but not like hands-on production software every day. So I feel like it's this idea that I can invest a couple years of my time really heavily into a company and really heavily into myself to say, like, I'm going to build out this new skill set that a lot of people, and had I never done this, I would never have the knowledge that I have even after a couple months in databases, and especially the knowledge that I will have after a year or two, right? Same thing for auth. So was I prepared for it? Yeah, I think like it makes me a little uncomfortable, but that was definitely a part of the reason why I took it, because it's a huge learning opportunity.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I love that you put yourself in those uncomfortable situations to be able to learn more and to grow. And I think those teaching positions actually give you a different skill set, and you learn almost more teaching others about it. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah. That's like going back to learn, build, teach. Like that's part of the teach and learn, build, teach is teach other people for their benefit, but also selfishly, more importantly, but not more importantly. Like if you are starting to talk about something, you realize really quickly while explaining it to someone else how well you actually know that thing. And I've caught myself in talks and YouTube videos, and I kind of like shy away from a topic because I'm like, I don't know this as well as I thought I did. So it's a perfect opportunity to reinforce the things you know, and then figure out if you actually know what in the world you're talking about to begin with.
Exactly.
Great point. Well, cool. Let's dive into it. I'm so eager to hear all about PlanetScale, and I'm going to throw up just kind of PlanetScale's front page here because
it's such a pretty
cool
site.
Page.
I love it.
We should definitely take a pause and just everyone admire. I have nothing to do with this, by the way, so admire the design and the team that builds the website. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you scroll through, it's kind of interesting on, where's it? Right here. It like just pops up and starts coding. I'm like, or I guess not coding technically, but terminaling.
Is this the CLI?
This is, yeah. So we have the PScale CLI, where everything that you can do, we'll talk about some of these features and things like you see there. Everything that you can do from the dashboard, at least as far as I know of, you can do with the CLI behind the scenes, which I've had a question for people in the past. If they're following documentation, do you prefer to have like instructions with the CLI or in an actual dashboard? And from a content documentation perspective, it's harder to update the GUI stuff, right? Because that like screens change and buttons get moved and text gets changed. Usually the CLI is pretty consistent, but like my personal thought is the first interaction that people have, probably want to do it inside of a GUI, but I know that differs from developer to developer.
So my first reaction, or my initial thought, is like when I read MySQL compatible, but this thing's serverless. From my experience, like you're either running a hosted service like Kubernetes or something with your SQL database sitting in it, or it's completely native to the cloud like AWS Dynamo or something like that. Where does this PlanetScale piece fit, or do you want to break down kind of what PlanetScale is and then get to that?
Yeah. So the short answer, I think, is it's like a hosted managed service on top of MySQL. And there's a middle layer that we kind of joked about before we started, which is Vitess. So Vitess is really where all the powerful features, again, that we'll talk about here in a second, that are inside of PlanetScale that are different, I think, than other platforms, come from the underlying layer of Vitess, which sits on top of MySQL. And to be quite honest, like MySQL, going back to the learning opportunity stuff, I had never directly used MySQL outside of WordPress uses it behind the scenes kind of thing. Like, so it was nothing particularly interesting to me about that. But then you start to layer on Vitess, and now the features that we have and are adding in PlanetScale. I don't have anything publicly to share, but the next couple of months are going to be really exciting. So keep an eye out for new features and things. But with this managed service, you have, your regular MySQL stuff. So anything you would, or most of the things that you would do with regular MySQL, you would have access to. And on top of that, you get really big scale. And so traditionally scaling with relational databases is very hard to do horizontally. So if people are familiar with this idea of scaling, like scaling vertically means I have a machine, I go get a bigger machine. It's got more RAM, it's got more hard drive, it's got whatever. But there's a limit to that, right? Like machines are only so powerful. We only have a chip with so much RAM, etc. So then you look at like scaling horizontally, where it's like, all right, I'm just going to kind of spread my data and shard it potentially across all of these different nodes that maybe are not as individually not the most powerful one in the world, but we can continue to build more and more and like semi get to infinite scale. So Vitess handles all of that stuff, allowing the horizontal scaling with databases, and it's like powering YouTube and things like that. So the scale is like a no-brainer. Like it's powered the biggest websites and databases in the world, which is pretty cool. And then, so outside of that, that's like pretty enterprisey. But then when you get to the developer features, it's like game-changing stuff. So you can do branches, which will make a copy of your schema. And like if I'm testing, I can go and create my branch, work on that. I don't have to create anything locally. It's all hosted by PlanetScale. I don't have to choose any configuration or anything when I start, other than like what data center I'm in. So I'm not having to choose 5 gigs of RAM, 250 gigs SSD or whatever, right? Like it's going to give me what it gives me in the free tier. I don't have to make any decisions about what that looks like before knowing what scale actually looks like.
That's so nice. And that's an important thing too, that you talked about. The free tier is having the ability to test things and use them without paying for it and limiting the accessibility to it.
Yeah, we just updated I'm looking at the pricing page now. We just updated this, I believe. And so on the free tier, you get 10 gigs of storage a month, and then 1 billion row reads. So the majority of like our pricing is based on row reads and then row writes. And the reads part is really interesting, as I'm deep diving into how reads work and optimization with indexes or indices, depending on how you say it, and how that impacts not only your performance, but in this case, the cost. So it's been kind of a fun deep dive. We've done internal lunch and learns with people that are like much more experienced than I am. And I'm just constantly like, what is this? How does that work? How does this affect so-and-so? So again, going back to huge learning opportunity for me.
So let me put this back together in my head, because I'm probably confusing it. Vitess is the technology part of this, right? And then the PlanetScale side of that is kind of using Vitess under the hood and putting some niceness around, like allowing you to scale out and a nice CLI for doing things. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, it's basically like if you were to use Vitess directly, there's lots of things that you would have to set up and manage and get configured and stuff. So PlanetScale sits on top of that. So you can click new database and you've got a new database. You can click new branch, you've got a new branch, et cetera.
Speaking of which, I mean,
yeah, the branching was a really cool feature.
Try it out.
Yeah.
So I threw this. This is the very start. I don't even think I've created a database yet, or maybe I did. Maybe this one.
I think you got that one there. Yeah.
So if I wanted to scale this thing, do I even have to think about it?
Nothing that you have to do. And again, you're on the free tier, so there's like probably don't have too much going on there, right? For the simple things that we do. We would have, I think, like bigger customers, we would have conversations early on to kind of figure out what potentially scale looks like for them. But once we get them onboarded, there's nothing really they have to do after that.
Can we talk a minute about what branches are then? I know you're starting into that. Like, what does a branch actually do, and how can I like update my database once it's out there?
Yeah. So branches are just kind of what you are used to in source control and GitHub kind of thing. It's actually, there's a lot of ex-GitHub people here. So you see a lot of GitHub influence in what we do. We use a lot of like GitHub issues for project management and that sort of stuff. So it's actually kind of cool. But one of our taglines is like the database for developers. So I think we want developers to feel more comfortable doing more powerful things with databases, not necessarily having to be DBAs themselves, right? That's an expensive and not so common trait in people that are like dedicated to being a DBA. They exist, but I think they're a little harder to find. And then also just make the developer experience as smooth as possible. So when you create a database, by default, you get a main branch that is not yet a production branch. What production branch means is you can't push changes directly to it. So again, like the idea of kind of protecting your master main branch in your code, similar idea here. So if I were to promote that thing to master or to the production branch, I can't push anything directly to it, which means to get changes into that production branch, you have to go through a deploy request, similar to how we would set things up with merge requests or pull requests in GitHub project. That way you have eyes on like approval step from someone else to make sure that, hey, this actually looks right before we push it. You also get like a diff of here's the difference in the schemas from what it was to what it is. And then you have a history of that you can kind of see, like what changes did we make at what time based on these branches and deploy
you make sure
requests.
You don't accidentally wipe out an entire table of data.
Yes. Yep. So
do you still have that up where you could show how you set the production branch, or did you already do that with that database?
So I just actually it just asked me, where do you want this database, and I selected Virginia, US Virginia, which was one of our questions on our list here, if this is running on AWS or GCP or something like that under the hood.
Yep, this will be AWS behind the scenes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Cool.
And if you click click on the codingcat.dev, anywhere on there, on that card. So it tells you this little pop-up. This database has no production branches. And then it tells you they're protected from direct schema changes. Those are the ones that have automated backups and are highly available. So again, you can do your testing on these other branches, but your actual production application would talk to and read and write to and from a production branch.
So similar to the CLI, could I actually create like a schema update right now? Is there a way to do this visually?
So not like a visual builder for your schema. Okay. A couple of things that you have access to. If you click on the branches tab, if you at the top. Yep. So if you think about schema changes, now instead of them being for the database as a whole, they're for specific branches. So you could go into your main branch there, and then you can see the schema. There won't be anything there now, but under the console tab, you could type in like a raw query. So this is a MySQL console, so you could do create table, blah, blah, blah. If you actually wanted to, I'd probably copy like an example from our quick start. We don't have to do that.
That's cool. I'll do it while we're chatting more about what these branches are like and stuff. So actually, if you're used to Git, it sounds like you're going to be able to see the schema changes and things like that. From my experience on SQL, there's breaking changes for a schema and non-breaking changes. What does that kind of look like as you're sitting like in your dev branch? You make a change and that gets promoted up to your main or your production branch. How does that affect things if it's going to break that schema? Is there downtime?
Was this a softball question on the downtime part? So I'll start with the first part, and then we'll do the downtime.
Cool.
And the first part is I'm not 100% sure. Like, how do complicated schema changes? What does that look like, and how does that get handled? As I learn more, Vitess behind the scenes is more and more magical. So a lot of the things that we have that are cool features that we'll talk about are because of Vitess. And the more I learn, the more amazing it is. So I think I still have some learning experience for like real world migrations or like real world schema changes in terms of we're making big changes. How does this affect this? And that's something I think that's still a learning opportunity for me. So I don't have a great answer on that part other than Vitess does do a lot of magic behind the scenes. The second part, though, on the downtime, and this is one of the really cool features, is Vitess enables there to be zero downtime deployment. And so it involves like a ghost database. It applies the schema changes there. It's copying over your data. It's also like not only copying over your data at this snapshot of your data at that point when you started, but it's continuing to stream changes. So you can continue to write to your database in your application as usual, continue to work with your production branch as usual. Your application's still running, it's reading, it's writing. At the same time, when the schema change is being applied, behind the scenes, it creates this ghost branch. It's copying over the data that was already in your database, and then it's streaming along those changes so that when it finishes applying the schema change and has all your data, now it just directs over to this new data. I mean, it's its own database. So it's redirecting now. It's just a switch that switches between one database to another. And that enables these zero downtime deployments and comes from Vitess. So going back to like, the more I learn about Vitess, the cooler and cooler it gets. One of those things that it enables is the zero downtime schema migrations.
It's really cool. It's interesting too. I always struggle with databases. I worked in SAP for years, and we switched from Oracle to SQL to whatever their new one is. I can't remember. And it's crazy, like the concepts in databases, how sometimes databases do locking, sometimes they don't. When you do a schema change, how does it actually, like, all of the data hitting this will continue until it kind of merges over. It's phenomenal.
That kind of brings up a live question we had too. Are there any plans to support additional database providers in the future?
Great question.
Yeah. So no, I think is the short answer. And the reasoning why is, I think it comes down to how complex Vitess is. Like, Vitess is a product that's been built over the course of, I couldn't even tell, 10 years at least, or I don't know exactly, but years of work has gone into Vitess. And if you look at the things that enables and the decisions that they made with Vitess, specifically sitting on top of MySQL, to do the equivalent of that on top of something like Postgres or something else would be an extremely large task. So I think our perspective is we're going to do what we do and do it really, really well. And instead of expanding into other database providers, we will stick with what we're doing really well and not try to branch out too much and not do those pieces as well.
That makes sense.
Another part of that too that we haven't mentioned is the idea of using an ORM in front of your database to interact with it. So ORM is object relational mapping or mapper, I forget, but
yeah.
I don't know if am I getting ahead of notes?
We were talking about this with Prisma, so I was just I just brought up that conversation that we had when we did the stream. Yeah.
Yep. So Prisma would be the ORM that's most common, I think, in Java, like super popular now, specifically for JavaScript and TypeScript ecosystem. And so thinking about something like Postgres and MySQL and local MySQL versus PlanetScale, we recommend, or at least for a lot of the stuff that we build, the demos we do, and a lot of the stuff that we see, using Prisma to interact with PlanetScale. And so going back to your question about, is there a visual builder to, creating your tables or changing your tables? No. But with Prisma, you get the ability to define a schema inside of a file. And then running a Prisma push command will actually send those changes to PlanetScale. So you have those things connected. Prisma then manages whatever you end up doing, creating tables, dropping tables, updating tables. And so you get this ecosystem of things that people are already familiar with that now integrate pretty well with PlanetScale.
Yeah. I'm trying to mentally put that together in my head. So is it able to do the whole branching strategy that occurs within PlanetScale directly from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a little bit of overlap in what we do with branching and what Prisma does with migrations. So if you've ever done Ruby on Rails, the migration pattern is pretty standard, where to make a change to your model, it's kind of keeping that record of what you were to what you changed to. It's keeping a record of that migration. So you have this migration history, and in theory, you could revert back to a previous snapshot in your migration history. Anyway, Prisma works in a similar fashion, where when you do, there's actually a Prisma migrate command, Prisma DB migrate, where it's going to make the changes to your database and also keep track of that migration information for you. Since PlanetScale has this concept of branching, it's a similar overlap, right? Like, PlanetScale has the ability to create the separate branch and then deploy requests that into a production branch or a different branch if you wanted to, and keep that record as well. So there's not as much of a need for this idea of migrations with the Prisma. So I specifically mentioned integrating with Prisma. You can run Prisma PlanetScale. You can run the Prisma DB push command instead of migrate. Push command will just push directly to the schema or to the branch. Can't be production branch because you can't push to a production branch. Whereas the migrate one would keep that migration information, which we don't need in this case because of branching. So there's a little bit of overlap where we don't need the migration piece. And I think I said most of what I want to say, but remind me what your original question was to make sure I addressed it all.
No, I think you're good. I just want to make sure with the whole like branching strategy and things like that. I'm just thinking of different products like WordPress, pops up in my mind as
Mhm.
well. Like there's visual tools out there that kind of create updates to a database, and typically those are probably happening on a live database. Like there isn't this strategy of
Mhm.
changing a schema or something like that, which it freaks me out every time
Yeah,
I have to go through it.
absolutely.
Um, I'm kind of curious, like, let's say WordPress, you did a great example on that side, but on a WordPress example like that, is it just as straightforward as normally using a MySQL database in that case?
Yeah, great question. And I think I missed one piece that I want to do with Prisma that will then be relevant, I think, for this as well.
Sure.
So with branches in PlanetScale and then working with Prisma, your Prisma is configured based on a password/connection string to a specific branch of your database. So if I want to create a new branch and do testing locally, I create a new branch and I create a new password, a new connection string that I then put into my environment variable file for Prisma to be directly connected to that branch. You can think of it as a completely separate database, but you've branched off to keep your original schema and you can build on top of it. So the difference there is just what your connection string is. So with WordPress, same kind of thing, which this like I've seen a lot of, and I've done some hacky-ish stuff with WordPress in the past. But same thing. If I'm running WordPress locally and I've got a branch in PlanetScale that's not my production branch, then that connection string for that specific branch, which is not production, is what I'm going to be connected to while running locally. You could also just run MySQL locally if you wanted to.
Sure.
And then in production, you're just swapping out that connection string to connect to PlanetScale or PlanetScale production branch instead of the test branch that you were locally.
So in the WordPress example, if I was out in my, oh man, it's been a while, PHP MySQL editor thing, if you want to add like a column in there or change a column, probably is a better example even, would you actually have to do that in PlanetScale and then connect to that new one? Or like, what does that look like? Because I see visual editors all the time making these changes to MySQL databases in production.
Yeah. So I think this would get a little out of the realm of the traditional
Okay.
setup because when you're running locally with WordPress, the last tool I used was something from fly.io, and it was
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a way easier way to manage your LAMP stack. Is that right?
yeah.
Apache,
I
Yeah.
MySQL,
think so.
PHP. Yeah. It was like the
I use
easiest way
MAMP.
to do that. Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of different ones.
Yeah.
So, so with that, you get like the MySQL local editor, I think is kind of what you mentioned, or PHP admin comes with it, right?
I think it's like PHP My Admin or
hmm
something like that.
So all that stuff kind of comes pre-packaged most of the time with WordPress. Like you do like a one-click setup and you're often running locally or you're deployed. That sort of stuff would be running MySQL locally. So I don't know where the actual connection string is in the WordPress internals because I haven't done this. But somewhere in there, you would just switch that connection string to be PlanetScale branch instead of local MySQL. You could still use local MySQL and then in production swap it out to do your MySQL production branch. The one thing though that would help with what we're talking about from a visual editor perspective is we have been integrated directly into Arctype, Arctype, TYPE. It may be worth pulling up if you have a second to do that.
I found Arctyperix. I don't know if that's the right
let
one.
me see if I can.
Uh,
It should be like Arctype MySQL
SQL, there
client
we go. Got it.
or SQL client. Yeah. So this one actually directly integrates with PlanetScale and then PlanetScale branches. So you can create branches here and have a visual editing experience for your schema.
Cool.
So if you're connected to PlanetScale running locally or in prod, you could, well, not in prod because you can't make changes directly to a production branch, but running locally, you could use this to make changes to your schema from a visual perspective. I'm glad I remembered that because I forgot about it earlier, but it's pretty cool.
No, it's really neat.
Is this where like the foreign key constraints and things come in where you have to set up some of those to connect to PlanetScale?
It's not related to that, but that is a great topic to cover. So limitations is not the right word because it's very intentional. But One of the things that is different about using PlanetScale is that foreign key constraints, specifically, not foreign keys, but foreign key constraints, are not supported. So foreign keys in a database are how we relate one table to another. So if there's like the book and author relationship, like book is going to have a primary key, its unique identifier, and it will have a foreign key that usually is the primary key of its author. So that's how we have these relationships in regular relational databases. The constraint part comes from if I want to delete a book that has an author attached to it, I can't delete this book without deleting this author. Like that's one example of constraints that the database can take care of for you, either to go ahead and automatically do the deletion of the other thing, or to not let you do the deletion of the first one because there would be this orphan record out there that you don't want to have. And maybe you didn't know there was an orphan record, so it's not going to let you delete the first thing because of the existence of the other. So those constraints are things that databases can take care of, but with PlanetScale/Vitess under the hood, those constraints are not supported. And I couldn't tell you the super technical details about that, but that has been a very intentional decision that then helps enable some of the features that we have from a scale and developer experience perspective.
That actually makes sense. I think I was getting them confused with like the passwords you were saying to set up between like Prisma and PlanetScale.
Cool. I'm just like thinking back through all my databases, and now that I've been like doing so much more kind of front end work and things like that, I've converted over to like I use Firestore because it's easy to set up, and like other like tools like that. And one thing that pops out in mind is Supabase is kind of floating around out there, and we got the question about Postgress and things like that. I'm kind of curious if like maybe the next evolution of PlanetScale is making that connection easier to get to, or is there a suggested way? I know we talked about Plasmic a little bit, but is there kind of like an easier way to get from me being a dumb front end developer, get a database up and like off to the races with an API?
I don't know. I thought it was easy.
Well, it's so I'll start by saying I'm a huge fan of Supabase. Actually just had a conversation internally where someone was kind of questioning like why would people want to use a specific feature of Supabase, and I was like, I can tell you, because it makes it so much easier to build a full stack. Like it enables some things from just a developer's perspective that you wouldn't have had before. Anyway, so I'm a huge fan of Supabase myself. They're doing really, really well. They've got lots of community support and people building with Supabase, so that's really great. We are not, as far as I know, we are not looking to be an all-encompassing platform like Supabase. And so Supabase has auth built in, it has role-level security policies, it has visual editor, it has all these things that you can do. It has streaming, so you can like in their SDK like do live updates and stuff, like listen for changes to your data and handle them. So that's not, from my understanding, our goal. Cool. If you think about the use case for just databases, there's plenty of use cases where it's like, I don't need all those other things. I just need a database, and I want to work with it in the context of my application that already exists, or the tool set or the stack that we already know that we want to build with. And so there's plenty of use cases to not need those features in Supabase that, again, can be really cool, especially when you're just getting started to build an app, because it makes it like from scratch, build it really fast. But that's not a necessary thing, especially for bigger development teams, established products that are doing migrations, or bigger products that are starting from scratch that, again, already have things in place that they know and love and use, and skill sets that they have. But I don't have anything specific, and I'm in like a weird limbo. Like the next couple of months legitimately is super exciting for me in terms of things that I've heard we're working on, things that we will start to announce. That is not a direct, don't infer anything based on that. That's not a direct correlation to a comparison with Supabase, so don't guess at any features.
Sure.
But there's exciting stuff coming in the next couple of months that I think will continue to drive developer experience first and foremost, and then also onboarding and in feature set, things that people would get out of it.
Maybe that's a good question too. Like, what types of applications would we want to use something like PlanetScale over something like Supabase? Like, where's that divide at?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not a whole lot to be quite honest. I think it's probably more relevant for what's the background that you already have. Like, do you need stuff with Supabase, that like those features that we talked about? Do you need those? If not, it's like you can just use it for a Postgres database, which is what it is behind the scenes. That's a valid option as well. The other thing I think is Vitess has been around for years now. Supabase, as awesome as it is, and I rave about Supabase all the time, is a newer product, right? It's built on top of MySQL. So, or excuse me, that's not true. It's built on top of Postgres. Let's get that straight. It's built on top of Postgres, which people love. That's been around for a while. But Supabase itself is relatively newer and it's younger. So people, enterprise companies are probably not looking for Supabase because of that at this point. Now, I'm sure they have plenty of customers that are doing really good stuff. But the traditional perspective, I think, is an enterprise company would not be looking for something that's that new. So I think one of the benefits we have is we can say we've got a wrapper that we built on top of Vitess, but Vitess, the stuff that powers all the stuff that we do, has been around for years on top of MySQL having been around for even more years. So I think that's one of the big advantages there. The other part, and this is not necessarily tied to like application specific, but it's more around the application itself. I think the developer experience stuff is really, really cool. The branching stuff is something that, as people hear about PlanetScale, that's one of the things I think that sticks, especially for bigger companies as well, to have those gateways to making changes to their data. Like one of the huge things for us at FedEx, older culture from a technical perspective, was we have to have, I don't even remember the word, but something change documentation for everything we do. Every database change has to be this big document. It has to be approved by VP. And then it was literally like the developer who knew about the database making the change because our DBA interaction was not that good, to be quite, or they weren't available. Now you kind of got some of that stuff built in. You have a pipeline that you have to go through. Also, I haven't talked about this. Like you can tie all that stuff into DevOps. So if you create a dev, if you push to a branch in GitHub Actions, like go ahead and spin up a new branch in PlanetScale, seed it with some data, run your unit test and your integration test, and then drop that branch when you're done. Like that stuff is super, super cool. And thinking about the future of where we already are with DevOps and automation and where we can go to incorporate the database from that level is like game-changing stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I think is like really nerdy, but also like really, really cool at the same time.
Yeah, you hit exactly where I wanted to head next, because my head's kind of rattling around with the mug back here, develop, preview, ship on the Vercel side. And I'm kind of thinking like one of the biggest problems when we deal with databases today is someone arguing like we don't have real data from production right now. And it'd be amazing, like when you go through that develop, preview, ship, if part of your workflow actually takes that branch, pulls it down, you connect to that, and then like you're previewing that updated data as you're pushing fixes or whatever. So that's what gets me kind of excited if I'm understanding the technology perfectly.
Yeah, there's one caveat to clarify for now is database branching is schema only. So it'll copy over your schema, but not your data.
I must have misread that. I thought the full production piece would come. Got it. Cool.
For now is just the schema. But then like you could have part of that be like go ahead and seed your database with testing data that you can use. And you probably want to do that anyway for automated tests, because you want to know you want to know exactly what the state of your data and your application is for when you do your test, to make sure same inputs get the same outputs kind of thing. If you were like visually testing or a different kind of test, where you didn't necessarily need to 100% know the controlled inputs, branching off of production data or something, have to be careful with that too because of PI and all those different things. So that's not something that I would say should be done very often, depending on the data set. But I think for the automated testing stuff, you probably want a super, super controlled feed of data that you know what it looks like, so that you can do your test, make sure all the ins and outs are the same.
I have to go on a tangent here because when I was working in the SAP realm, we had databases that had similar data or QA data or whatever, and we kept running into this bug, and it drove us crazy on performance side. It was because we had a table that had filled up to like 25 million rows or some absurd number, and we were doing like counts against it, and the performance just was horrible. And we never even thought to put all of that data kind of down in one of our dev databases. So it is important to figure those things out too.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that is we would do some of that with FedEx for like load testing, and it was not super automated. Like we were having to manually copy in data and stuff, but we would take like 2 times or 3 times or 4 times the amount of production data for a night. So I worked in sorting stuff. So if a package went through FedEx at the hub, there's in the sorting stuff that we worked on, there's 750,000 packages that go through the sorter in about 4 hours or something like that. Like those are kind of rough numbers, but each time that package gets scanned on these automated belts, it has to know from here, I need to get pushed off to this other belt. So you're having to make a snap decision within like milliseconds. Where does this thing go? And so you have records, multiple scan records and event records for each one of those packages, 750,000 a night and 1 million up during peak season in production for night. So what we would do is we like could potentially double that, right? Like, can we assuming that peak is never going to be quite 2 times what we have now, it'll be 1.5 maybe. That'll be high. Let's go ahead and run this stuff in our dev servers or QA servers or whatever with 2 times the data. And then if you can handle that, you can feel better about being able to handle the load in production.
Yeah, that's a great point. My timer didn't go off, so I've got to take a quick break to hit our advertisement for Builder.io, and then we'll be back with picks.
Cool. Today's podcast is brought to you by Builder.io, visually building the web. Builder.io has one of the most powerful visual editors in the industry. Unlike other tools, Builder actually produces the code for you. You don't have to completely switch out your framework either, just use one of the handy SDKs that are available. There's no limits to what you can build. Instead of limiting your marketing team, start to optimize and let them do the work. This will allow your web developers to get back to the hard work that it takes for other components, allowing your team to do A/B testing and personalization. Stop worrying about bugs in production. Just use the site as it is, then you can analyze and start converting all of your customers with Builder's built-in heat maps. Stop limiting your growth with developers' long lead times. Start building, optimizing, analyzing, and start growing faster. Don't take my word for it. You can sign up for free today and start building the web visually with Builder.io.
Whew. Advertisement in. Should have moved it up a little further. My bad, Builder. Thank you.
Nice transition, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna jump into our Purrfect Picks now, because I know James is like a million
streams today.
So.
It's a 3-stream kind of day. Yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna throw you on the fire and let you go first here.
Okay, so I'm doing my pick. Well, you got the link up. So I do a lot of content, and I have for my setup for like video content or tutorial stuff, I have my Shure SM7B, which is like one of the top of line mics, and it works great. But my problem was if I was doing anything mobile, I was kind of struggling to get good audio, especially if there's like the AC or the heater is running in the background or whatever. So anyway, I did a bunch of research, and Rode is like the brand that most people go to. And then I saw this one that you got on here, the Sennheiser MKE 400. This is on a tripod and a whole thing, so I can plug my phone into that. But this one, basically, from all the reviews that I saw, like was as good as the top of the line equivalent Rode mic, and then had a couple of other really cool features, like the battery. Like this won't turn on unless it's plugged into a phone or camera. Even if you plug it into the camera, it's not going to turn on if the camera's not on itself. So that's the cool. Mic doesn't turn on wastefully. It has batteries, which I actually prefer because if it dies, I can swap out batteries immediately versus making it
having to charge.
Wait to charge. Yep. It has built-in like windscreen stuff, so you don't have to put on like a windsock if you're outside, because the mic is actually inside of this thing itself. This is not the mic; it's inside of there. Yeah, there you go. But there is a windsock that you can carry with it. And it came with like cables to support hooking up to, like this cable is specifically for iPhone. It's the TRS3 or whatever. It's the thing that has like 3 rings on it. And they also have the regular one with 2 rings that is
I should have probably zoomed in. Sorry.
oh, it's all good. That's for the for your cameras. Anyway, super versatile. It's super small. Let's see if I can get the autofocus on here. There we go. Yeah, I have to
So
like hide
nice.
enough. So yeah, it's worked out really well. The quality I think is pretty good. It's lightweight. We talked about this before. I haven't really taken it with me, but I will take it with me on trips because it's small and easy to hook up to my phone.
Very cool. Great
I
pick.
think I just remembered you talking about it on compressed, and you were maybe talking about taking it on future trips.
Yeah, I'm looking. I want to do this whole like. I feel like it shouldn't be man on the street interviews, although I say that just because it's what people have heard of, man or woman on the street interviews, or people on the street interviews. But just the thing of like walking up to random people and asking them a question, especially at a conference. Like, as a developer, tell me something fun about yourself that's not developer related. Tell me about your worst moment as a developer. Like, I feel like that would be really cool.
That
That
would
would
be
be cool.
interesting.
Yeah,
Or you
I'm
could do
looking
your
forward to doing
TikTok videos just like pop up in the street.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
gonna follow you around. I'll do the camera work. Let me know when we're doing it.
absolutely. I've got conferences coming up, so if you want to tag along, please do.
Nice.
Sounds great. Brittany, your pick is up next.
Nice. Yes. So Inventing Anna was really intriguing. And the fact that it's based on a true story. So you're kind of following along, not quite in real time. I think it was a couple of years ago, but it's just absolutely bonkers crazy. And I highly suggest that you watch it after you get over the fact that her accent is really, really strange. It is very weird, but it was a really good show.
Seeing her transformation from Ozark to this is just, it's mind blowing.
She's got to be an amazing actress because that's like completely different genres.
Cool.
I like this. I'll have to check that out.
I love how it always pauses my face. I'm like, awkward.
I wish you showed the cover. Like I can.
Yeah, right. Show the cover at first or something. But I had James on last week, 2 weeks ago, and we did a whole thing with PlanetScale, hooking it up with SvelteKit using Prisma. And like I said, I thought it was super easy and developer friendly. And I got to use like JavaScript stuff I'm familiar with and not all the database things. You can probably see in the middle of it, I mess up trying to write the little command for MySQL. I am not a database person, but I felt like this was very comfortable.
It's funny. I used to know like I could write SQL no problem, and now
I forgot the semicolon because I don't use semicolons anymore.
Yeah,
for what it's worth, that's a UI thing that we should do better at in inside of the PlanetScale console. So that's something we should add. But
cool. My first pick is Envato Elements. Been doing a lot of video work, which you're kind of noticing bits and pieces as we go along with the live show here. I kind of stayed away from these like templated things, but it would take me so many hours to complete a lot of these transitions in Adobe After Effects. I think it's worth it. When I break down my hourly cost versus what comes out of it, excellent piece. I was a little nervous on the licensing, so I hesitated for a long time, and now I finally like understand it fully and how it can be used. So highly suggest it if you're looking for video features, especially if I go to the video templates here. They've got After Effects, but I use a lot of the Premiere Pro ones that are already set up, and I can dump logos and everything else in there. So check that out. It's
presentation templates are really good too. I've had those before.
It's cool.
So can I ask you a question about that?
Hit me.
So I have a subscription too. And the one question I had, like for sound effects, I want to use, I think you have to document every YouTube video that you use them in. So like for a social media template, like an animated Twitter thing, I think you had to register like every video, which I want it to be in every single one of mine. Is that something you've
I have to tell you, I get super nervous on the audio. So I only use YouTube Studio's audio approved items. So if you go into studio.youtube, they have the whole, it's a huge catalog. So I only use those and usually search for the ones that don't require the license piece. So yeah, haven't dove into the sound side. It makes me nervous. I don't want videos to get pulled down or my channel to get blocked.
Yes.
Cool. Second pick. Been having a lot of fun with this at Builder. So this is called, it's made by Raycast. I think it's called Ray, but I love this thing because I can,
Raycast is awesome.
yeah,
It is.
Raycast is awesome too. But I can just dump code in and literally just on the export, just say either save or copy is what I usually do. Copy it and dump it into Twitter right away. So it's like I used to always like take a screenshot of VS Code or something like that. This has been so much easier.
I used to use Polar Code, and then Polar Code stopped working in VS Code at some point, and I have not found something to do this, so I need to use this.
That's interesting. Oh, got to put James back in the right spot.
I still use Polar Code and VS Code.
There's also I don't know why it stopped working for me.
Yeah, I don't know. Carbon.sh is another one, but I'm a big fan of, I use Raycast on my computer, so I didn't know that they had like other products. So that's the reason I feel like for me to try them out, because I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Love Raycast. They also have an amazing website. I should probably put that up real quick. Check this out. So this is Raycast's website.
I haven't seen the newest one. It
takes over your Spotlight search on Mac. If no one knows what that is. So.
Oh yeah, good point. We didn't talk about the product. I'll have Purrfect pick this next time.
Yeah. Can I throw in a second one just for a small conversation piece?
Of course you can.
This is more an exciting thing for Jess and I. We're going to Paris and London. I'll be speaking at a conference in London, and we're going early to go to Paris. And we already speak English, so we don't need to learn. Like maybe we'll do some British terms research, but we've been studying not Spanish, French on Duolingo. So we've been doing that for like 8 days straight. And we watched a movie last night and watched it with French subtitles, which I recognize more words than I thought I would. So we've been using Duolingo every day for over a week, and we'll use it every day leading up to going to Paris.
That is awesome.
Do you find like you can talk to each other in French, or it's just like words here and there that you're going to be able to pick up more?
It's definitely more going to be us picking up stuff.
Cool.
But I think that's something that we need to do more with each other, because that's like the thing we don't quite have, is that like immersive experience, which is how I learned Spanish, was just being around it almost every day for years at a time.
That's cool.
That conversational piece adds so much more to language. Like learning it in a classroom type setting is just so different.
Yeah. My son's goes to Spanish immersion, so he's full-time Spanish. He's starting to transition out as they go to high school, but it's really interesting. My wife like learned Spanish back in the day, but hasn't used it, and listening to them talk, and then like going to Italy, Spanish is so similar, so she was able to kind of get us around. But there's other countries we're like a little more nervous about traveling into, so this would be a good tool to get into.
Yeah, Jess and I were just talking about the similarities between Spanish, French, and Italy, and I said the same thing. Like knowing so much Spanish, I bet I could go to
languages,
Italy, and recognize 50% of the words that I see.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks, James, for joining us once again. And check out James Q Quick on YouTube and Compressed.fm, and we'll catch you next time.
Later.
See ya.
It's not playing.
Still not playing.
We can say hello and just talk over it, but this is supposed to have outro.
Hi, everyone.
All right.